Hello everyone, this is Ruben Wan here and welcome to Guitar.com Live 2020. In today's workshop, I'll be giving you an exclusive peek into my creative process along with useful information, tips and tricks that you can immediately apply to your creative process. I'll be covering topics such as how to create highly engaging guitar riffs for social media, my point of view on how I mix the tracks for it, and also how I approach the filming and video editing side of everything. Without further ado, let's get started. This first part of the workshop is all about the creation of the musical composition along with the recording and mixing process of it. So what's the first step in this creative journey? So before I even pick up my guitar or log into my computer, what I like to do is to give purpose to whatever I'm gonna be creating that day. The purpose can be determined into two categories. At least I like to categorize them into these two. Is one, it can be based on meaning and inspiration. And the second one will be goal-oriented. So let's start with an example with the first one, inspiration. What I recommend you doing is that before you even start creating a piece or start recording is to pinpoint an emotion or an event that happened to you that week that you would like to represent through your music. It can be something very simple or something even very grand, right? So you can use an emotion such as, I felt sad on Monday. You can use that sadness from Monday as fuel to whatever you're creating today. The second category is the mission or goal-oriented. You know, as musicians, inspiration is scarce. Not every day you're gonna feel inspired by something, or not every week is very eventful, or sometimes it's just hard to feel inspired, right? So what does the second category looks like? In a day that I'm not feeling inspired at all, I would still force myself to create a track, but I won't just create it because I want to, right? What I like to do is write down the goal behind it. These goals can be something as simple as, I want to showcase my progress with pentatonic licks this week. You don't have to tell people that's the meaning behind the video you created, but it'll definitely help you give your video a sense of direction, and it'll help you go from point A to point B. Lastly, the main takeaway from this long step one of before even picking up the guitar is to give your creation a purpose. Before you even start creating, determine these two things: the inspiration behind the song you're creating or the goal. It can be one or the other, or it can be both, but at least have one of them, and that will make your end product so much more rewarding. Step two, now that you have determined why you're even creating this piece or why you're even playing music at all today, is determine whether your guitar piece is gonna be a solo guitar or you're gonna be playing on top of a backing track, right? For the purposes of today's workshop, I'll be using a backing track that I produced, and I'll be coming up with guitar composition on top of it. Here's a short clip of how the backing track sounds like, and you're gonna see the end product at the end of this workshop. As you just heard, this is a very simple backing track. There's nothing fancy going along, and the goal with this piece is to highlight the guitar riffs I'm gonna be coming up on top of it. And something that I want to add to this explanation is that this guitar piece was not based on an emotion or inspiration, but rather a goal. The goal was twofold. The first one, this is gonna come out as a lick package for online music platform Pickup Music, and the second goal was to use this for the purposes of this workshop. So like I mentioned, even when you're uninspired, you can still create something that you like if you have a goal in mind. The creative process varies depending on the day, but usually if I have a backing track I'm gonna be adhering to, I usually like to spend at least 30 minutes jamming to it and just getting a feel of the track before I even hit record on my guitar. Once I have a feel of the backing track after jamming to it for 30 minutes or so, I like to do a vocal take. So this might sound awkward for a lot of people, especially for musicians, but what I like to do is to take my iPhone, I start the voice recording, I play the backing track, and I just start humming whatever comes first to my mind. Once I'm done with this vocal solo take, I like to hear it back. It might sound horrible because I'm not a great singer, but what I like to do is to transcribe whatever I was singing on top of the backing track on the guitar. So I use everything I sung and put it into guitar language, and I add in some fancy guitar tricks to make it sound more interesting or make it more appropriate for guitarists, and I go from there. Remember, music and your own sound comes first. A lot of guitarists are very used to just depending on all the fancy guitar chops and licks they've built over the years, and they tend to sound very similarly every single time they're playing. I'm guilty of it too, but lately I've tried to do more interesting things to freshen up and make my playing sound less boring and also to entertain myself. So this exercise of singing the vocal take into a phone and the backing track playing in background and then transcribing it into your guitar and your guitar language is very beneficial for your overall growth and also your own amusement. Because in my experience, usually these vocal takes, when I translate them to guitar, they're usually the best sounding ones. Lastly, don't be embarrassed and try it at least once. You're gonna be surprised at how much better and how much smoother your guitar playing will sound when you're trying to emulate your inner voice into your instrument. Once you have the backing track ready and you figure out the main solo guitar lines you're gonna be playing on top of it, it's time to pick an axe. My weapon of choice today is the Heritage Guitar H535. It just fit the backing track really well tonally, and also it was a great fit aesthetically for how I wanted my video to look like. So even before you start recording, you have to think ahead. You have to think about what you want your video composition to look like and what you want your sound to sound like, basically. My recording rig nowadays is rather simple. In the past, I would use my clunky big pedal board that I would bring to live shows and use that to record my guitars. But nowadays, I have joined the dark side and I use plugin as my daily driver. I'm part of the Neural DSP family, so I'm lucky in that regards. And yeah, how I record my guitars is simple. I just plug my cable in and I go through my audio interface into my DAW. I use Ableton, and on my audio track I just put in the plugin. It varies nowadays. Nowadays I use a lot the Neural DSP Corey Wong archetype or the Pliny archetype. As for my audio interface, I use the Apogee Duet. A cheaper alternative to it would be something like the Scarlett Focusrite. I used that for years and years before switching, and it was great and did the work fine, right? They both have really good preamps, so don't worry about that. It will do the job. The magic is mostly in the fingers and not in your gear. A great guitarist would make crappy gear sound amazing, and you can't say the same about the opposite of that. So yeah, focus on your musical composition before anything else. Now that you've seen my simple guitar rig, a beginner tip that is often overlooked is getting good levels from the guitar into your software. A lot of people tend to clip their tracks. They put too much distortion and too much gain, and then everything just sounds like a mess and just chaos. The opposite would be to record with too little output, or like the waveform just looks tiny. You want to avoid both scenarios because it's very hard to make your guitar sound good once you're mixing. So before you even start playing and hit the record button, make sure you're getting solid levels into your software. You can adjust it with your preamp on your audio interface, or even on the preamp in your software, right? Because the last thing you want to do is get the perfect take and be like, uh-oh, the levels were all messed up. It's really hard to fix afterwards. But yeah, remember to record with good audio levels. Once you feel like you have the take or your favorite takes, it's time to put down the guitar and put on your audio engineer hat. In no way it is acceptable to keep your guitar with you, because we musicians suffer from something called self-doubt. And when you're mixing your track and rehearing your takes, you're gonna feel like you want to re-record certain parts, right? So what I recommend is to simply put down your guitar and just focus on mixing. I'm in no way a pro when it comes to mixing, but I like to trust my ears, and I feel like that will go a long way. So start trusting your ears, right? I mean, this is super simple right now. You have a backing track and a guitar. Make sure they both blending well. Make sure the levels sound good. And if you want to get a little fancy, panning goes a long way too. Just make it interesting by panning certain licks from the left to the right, or making them automate them to like go full circle and create a really nice effect depending on whatever lick you are playing, right? I tend to add in an EQ and a compressor. When it comes to EQ, just putting a low pass, high pass, and depending on my guitar take and the track I'm playing to, I like to hear different frequencies. You put in a notch, you put it all the way high, and then you sweep around to hear whatever frequencies you don't like, and whatever you don't like, you just lower the dB on that specific frequency. For the compressor, I trust Neural DSP's compressor. It's usually perfect. I just hit the on and it's like having a compressor pedal, so I don't take too much, so I just don't give that too much thought, right? I focus on making sure my plugin is sounding well, my EQ is sounding well, and most importantly, my guitar track has good levels. The main takeaway from this whole mixing and recording part of the workshop is, one, the musical composition and the meaning behind why you're even creating it in the first place comes first. That is top priority. The mix comes second, third, fourth, last, and you don't really need a perfect mix for sound on social media. What people are looking for is more about a loud track, loud guitar, loud everything, as long as you're not clipping. And the goal here is not to produce a high quality song for official release or for streaming and distribution, right? People are looking for visually, aesthetically pleasing, and really creative musical compositions, basically. So don't put too much pressure on mixing and prioritize the musical composition, its meaning, and also how well it looks on video. Before I wrap up this section, I want to mention a little bit about how I treat the mastering part of it. I have this plugin called Ozone 9, which is a mastering suite plugin that uses algorithm to master your track, basically. I just drag and drop it into my master track in my DAW. And what it does is that it brings my levels to standard across platforms, along with improving my overall sonic quality a little bit. I trust it. It does wonders, but I think this only applies for mastering audio for social media. I highly recommend you hiring a professional mastering engineer if you plan to put this song out for official release, as in streaming services or distribution. Now that we're done with the musical composition, mixing, recording, and mastering aspect of this creative journey, let's talk a little bit about filming and video editing. My camera of choice is a Canon 5D Mark IV. It's a DSLR, and I prefer using prime lenses with low aperture because it helps you create a blurrier background and makes the image way crispier. It's worthy to mention that you don't need a fancy and expensive camera to make your video look great. I've done many great videos using my iPhone. iPhone's cameras nowadays, or any smartphone nowadays, their cameras are amazing, and you can get similar results or even better if you have the proper lighting equipment. Here's an example of an iPhone video that looks just as great as any other videos I have using a fancy DSLR camera. Remember, don't worry too much about having expensive guitars, expensive recording gear, expensive recording camera equipment. The most important thing is to create something that you identify with and that has meaning to you. The musical composition is first always. Although having an expensive camera is not super important, one thing I do really recommend is getting a good key light. Or not even a good key light, getting something that will properly illuminate you, right? I've been using the same key light from Amazon that I bought 4 years ago for less than $80 on Amazon. Oh, this is it. And yeah, it really makes a big difference to the overall mood of your video composition. And no matter what camera you have, if you have crap lighting, your video is gonna look awful, right? And even with a bad camera, if you have proper lighting, you can make your video composition look great. Now that we're done talking about the camera gear and the lighting, some tips you have to remember: set your camera at an eye level, or at least this is what I like to do. You don't have to follow these guidelines, but what I like to do is set up your camera at an eye level, Ideally, have the key light or your main light at an angle so you can create a shadow in the back. Make sure your guitar can be seen in the shot. Your head is seen in the shot. You can get creative with it, but usually people on social media like to see your hands properly, make sure they're not blurry, and they like to see somebody playing it, right? So make sure you're in the frame, make sure there's good lighting coming through. If you don't have a key light, just set yourself up in front of a window, make sure there's plenty of light coming in through the window, put your camera in between the window and yourself, and start shooting. Oh, and also make sure your background looks visually pleasing. Make sure it's not too messy or too distracting from what you're playing, because you want people to focus on you, not on your messy background, right? Camera settings. So for camera settings, I recommend you use 4K if you have 4K. If you don't have 4K, use 1080p. If you don't have 1080p, use 720, right? Most people have access to 720, 1080, and most iPhones nowadays, they come with 4K. Yeah, if you have 4K, just use it. Why not, right? I tend to use 1080p just because the file sizes are smaller, so it's easier for me to edit. But this is just preference again. As for the frame rate, I personally like 24 frames per second the most. It looks the best to my eyes, but feel free to play around with 30 FPS, 60 FPS, and yeah, just find the one that you like the most. Just make sure that on your video editing software, your project settings match your camera settings. If they're too different from each other, it's gonna cause frames to be dropped or syncing issues, etc., etc. Yeah, to change these settings, most cameras, it's super intuitive. On the iPhone, you just go to your general settings, click on camera, and all these options show up. A quick recap, for my personal settings, I tend to shoot in 1080p just because the file sizes are smaller. But if you have 4K, feel free to use that. It definitely looks better, and it allows you to zoom in and zoom out and do keyframing without losing too much resolution. For my frame rate, I use 24 FPS. Feel free to play around 30, 60, 120, whatever you like the best visually. No messy background, and remember, lights are more important than your gear. Once everything is in place, the camera, the lighting, the background, the settings of your camera, it's time to lip sync or hand sync your guitar playing. Although the most natural looking way is to record your video and your audio track at the same time and not sync it, I personally find the process more efficient and faster when I record all the audio beforehand and then replicate that take on film, right? Also, for the purposes of this video, it helps me explain each section better and help you digest the content better. Remember to be very patient with recording. Similar to audio recording, it's gonna take a lot of takes to replicate a take close enough to the one on audio. So yeah, take as much time as you need, be patient, and if you give it enough of your time, the end result will be way more rewarding. Okay, so now everything is in order, right? We have the audio track and the best video take possible. It's time to import everything into your video editing software. I personally use Final Cut Pro X, but for the longest time I was using iMovie, and it was just as good when it came to video editing. Once I'm in the video editing software, I just drag and drop my video take and my audio track. I like to use my audio track as the primary storyline and then put the video on top of it and just go from there and sync it. You zoom in into the track and just make sure the first audio waveforms line up with each other, right? A couple useful things I recommend you guys looking into is how to mess with keyframing and also the transform portion of your video editing software, as this helps to create a certain mood and story to your video. I usually use keyframe just to follow my fingers, make people engage with what I'm playing more. Don't overuse it, as it sometimes makes people dizzy, but be smart about using keyframing to follow your fingers. The last step of video editing is coloring your video. What I use are LUTs. LUTs are basically video filters or color filters for your video. I have some predetermined ones I've collected throughout the years. You can make your own inside the video editing software, and that usually makes your video pop up, right? Or stand out, I guess. Yes. A very popular color scheme nowadays is teal and orange, but feel free to look more into LUTs and how you can add them to your videos, because I believe that really creates a different overall mood for your video composition. Make sure, whether it's keyframing or whether you're coloring your video, make sure that's only enhancing your aesthetics and video composition rather than taking away from your playing. It's very important to find a balance between creating an engaging, visually pleasing video portion that matches the audio track of it, right? And at the end of the day, remember the thing I've been saying throughout the entire workshop. Your musical composition comes first. Expensive gear, having a perfect mix, having the best video take possible, all of that comes second, after the meaning behind why you were playing in the first place and why you created the piece and how your piece, as in your musical piece, sounds together. Sadly, we have reached the end of this workshop. I hope you were able to learn a lot of useful information that you can immediately apply to your creative process, how you make musical compositions and video compositions. Thank you so much for joining me at guitar.com live 2020, and don't forget to follow me on social media. My handle is @Ruben Wan on YouTube, Instagram, and you can just find me everywhere through my name, Ruben Wan. And to end this workshop, here's how the final product sounds like. Thank you for your time. Have fun learning, have fun playing. Most importantly, don't stop creating. Thank you.